So yesterday, OpenAI's DevDay announced a whole bunch of new features, some of which are, I think, pretty game-changing. So in particular, I wanted to play around with the new Assistants API. This is basically an API that enables you to do retrieval augmented generation, plus a whole bunch of other stuff, without needing to do a lot of the work. Before this API, in order to be able to retrieve information from your own knowledge base and to augment the response of the chatbot with your own knowledge, you would have had to put all your files separate them into appropriate chunks, and then use an embedding API to turn all those chunks into embeddings, put all those embeddings into a vector database to support a cosine similarity search. And then once those relevant chunks are found, that will then get passed to an LLM like OpenAI to deliver a response to the user, which is, a bit of work. And with this new release, we won't have to do that anymore. So what I wanted to do today is to firstly explain at a high level some of the new jargon and just a big picture of how it all works. And knowing this big picture, it will make the code much more easy to understand. And we will also run through a working code from scratch of how you build the assistant and how you use it. So let's take a look at this. So today we're releasing the Assistants API, our first step towards helping developers build agent-like experiences within their own applications. So this is not just about being able to retrieve knowledge from your own files, but through this thing called function calling, you can also give it capabilities to take actions by providing it with your own APIs. And you'll also notice here that the Assistants API is built on the same capabilities that enable our new GPTs product. Custom instructions and tools such as code interpreter, retriever, and function calling. So they also announced this thing called GPTs, which is the concept of custom chatbots that are built on top of the GPT large language model. And they will be releasing an interface to build these GPTs in a no-code way shortly. But if you want to spin up your own and have more control over it, you can basically use the Assistants API, which we will talk about right now. When you think about how the Assistant API works, there are basically two key concepts that you need to understand. The first is a concept of an assistant, and then the second is a concept of a thread. So the assistant is basically where you define how your custom chatbot actually works and what resources it has access to. And the thread is where you would store the user messages and the assistant responses. And you can think of each thread as being one conversation with one particular user. So let's come back to the assistant. So each assistant would have a name. Here I've called mine legal chatbot, and you can have a description. Oh, it's a chatbot that can answer questions about the Hong Kong Stock Exchange listing rules. And there are a number of attributes. So you can define the underlying foundation model that it uses. At this point in time, it is supported by only two models. One is called GPT4 1106 Preview. So this is, I believe, the GPT4 Turbo, which was announced yesterday, and also GPT 3.5 Turbo 1106. I'm sure there'll be more models that are supported moving forwards, but these are the two that we can use today. Secondly, you can define a set of files that your assistant can retrieve from to get additional information. And I'll show it to you when we go through the code in a second. But basically, you just upload your files to your space on the OpenAI server, and it will return you a list of file IDs. And depending on which files you want to give your assistant to, you can pass in an array of file IDs. And of course, if you have multiple assistants that need access to the same files, you can just, these files can be shared across different assistants. And then you can also give it some instructions, like system instructions, like you are a friendly chatbot that is an expert in legal matters. And then finally, the super powerful thing is here, tools. What you can do is to pass it an array of up to 128 different tools. And we have retrieval, which it will need to be able to retrieve stuff from these files, as code interpreter, and also functions. And I talked about this in an earlier video called function calling. You can pass it custom API functions that give your assistant additional superpowers. For example, you can have a function that enables the assistant to fetch real-time pricing from your database, or you can have your assistant call an API that sends an email or an SMS. So yeah, this whole thing's pretty powerful. So once you've defined your assistant and created it, it will be identified using this assistant ID. And separately, you have this thing called thread. So let's say, you first create an empty thread, and then the user comes along and asks his or her first question. What you will do is to create a message and put it inside the thread as the first user message. But just creating the message doesn't do anything because you've just added it to a thread. The thread needs to be combined with an assistant to in a run operation. And so when it runs, it's basically applying this assistant to these messages, and then sometimes it can take a little while because I guess it's still a beta product, and you'll need to keep monitoring the status of the run. And it should say in progress. And once it's done, when you can see that it's complete, then it will write the assistant's response back to the thread. And once you see that it's complete, what you can do is to retrieve this whole thread and then output the latest assistant message back to the user. And if the user has a follow-on question or point of clarification, you then create another message, do another run, do another retrieve. So it just keeps on building and building. And what's great about this thread management as well is that if you have a very, very long thread, you might exceed the context window. And OpenAI has developed some intelligence in here such that it helps you to truncate all of this stuff into a size that will fit into the context window. So perhaps it will cut out some of the old stuff or maybe summarize it so the knowledge is still encapsulated in a smaller number of tokens. So now let's move on to the code. All right, so now we're in Google Colab, and I'm going to walk through step by step how to create an assistant and how to create threads and then how to use it. So as usual, we install OpenAI and set up the packages in our environment. So while it's running, the next step is we need to authenticate with an organization ID and an API key. So here I've hidden mine, but what that cell looks like is something like this, and you need to replace these X's with your own OpenAI API key and also your organization ID. And then once you've done that, you can run this cell that completes the authentication, and it'll return a client object. So step one is, so for this demo, I'm focusing on the retrieval functionality. So the first step is you want to make sure that you've uploaded the files that you want to give your assistant access to. And given that I'm in the Colab environment, what I just need to do is to drag and drop the file into this area of Colab, so the code has access to those files locally. So here I've put in the file name, and we're calling client.files.create, and we play. And what it's going to do is to return to me a file ID. And if you've uploaded a bunch of files, you can retrieve a list using this. And in the code below, we're going to be using this variable called file ID. So I'm just going to copy and paste it in here. So now that you've uploaded your files and gotten the file ID, right now I'm just using one file, but of course you can upload any number of files, and there are many formats supported. So step 2 is that we need to create the assistant and to give it access to the file or files, and then print out the assistant ID, which is the identifier for this assistant. So here we're going to call client.beta.assistants.create. We're going to pass it some instructions. You are a chatbot designed to respond to inquiries about the Hong Kong Stock Exchange listing rules. And then we're going to define the model that we're going to use, and we're going to pass it some tools. And as you can see here, it's an array, and we're only passing it one tool right now, which is the retrieval. And the file IDs, as you can see, is also an array. And here we're just passing it one file, but you can, add more here if you like. So let's play that and take a little while to create. So here we go. This is the ID of our assistant. And sometimes when you're testing, you might want to make some changes to your assistant's configuration. For example, you want to change the instructions up, you want to switch to GPT 3.5, you want to give it some more tools or add some more files. What you can do is to call this client.beta.assistants.update, and it will update the assistant that's sitting at this assistant ID. We won't run that now, but you would need to make sure that this value matches this one, so the one that you're updating is the one that you just created. All right, so the steps that I walked through just now is if you're doing this for the first time. But let's say you've already created an assistant and you just wanted to use it with a new thread. In that case, you can skip steps 1 and 2, and instead of that, you would just retrieve an existing assistant that's already been created. And let's say you forgot the assistant ID. What you can do is to call client.beta.assistants.list to retrieve a list of all of the assistants that you've already created. And here I only have one. And so you take the assistant ID and you retrieve it like so. So client.beta.assistants.retrieve. And so you can retrieve that and use it. We won't do that right now because we've just created it. So then we go on to step 3. So step 3 is we've created our assistant, and now we need to create an empty thread. So let's just create that thread. And the thread also has an associated ID with it. And as you can see here, there's really nothing in this thread right now. And let's say a user comes along and asks the first question. Let's say, can you explain the criteria for independence for board directors serving on the board of companies listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange? Okay, so here it's the user asking, so the role is user, and we're adding it to this thread that we've just created. So we're writing a message into the thread. So that's done. And what we've done just now is just written this first user message, but it's not going to do anything because you need to combine the thread and the assistant into a run operation before the LLM will be called for a response. So step 4 is to run the assistant to get a response. So as you can see here, we're calling client.beta.threads.run.create, and we're passing it two things, the thread ID, which is basically all the content, and the assistant ID, which is the configuration of our chatbot. And we can also pass in additional instructions here. What I've found is that it doesn't seem to listen to these instructions, so maybe that'll be something that they'll fix later on. So let's just run this. And each run also has an ID. So after you run it, you can retrieve the run and print out the status. And it says it's in progress. And I think things are a little bit slow today because maybe everyone's testing this. So you basically can't move on to the next step until this says complete. And if it gets stuck for whatever reason, you can run this here to cancel the run, but you would need to make sure you paste in the thread ID and the run ID here. So I've added this while loop here so I can keep trying to retrieve the run status and then keep going until it's complete or failed. But it appears that OpenAI is down right now. Must be because we're all pounding it. So anyway, I will update this video with the worked examples later on when the service is back up and running. But let me just finish talking you through the steps. So step 6 is that after the run is complete, then you can retrieve the full list of messages from your thread by running this. And if I do that now, it's not gonna have the response. And then because your threads is basically an array of user and assistant messages, so here I've just like looped through each of the messages in the thread to print it out. And in an actual, so you can see that I've got the user question, but not the assistant's response because the service is down. But basically that's how you do it. And then if, let's say, you got a response and then you want to ask a follow-on question, you need to go back to step 4 and change out this question, like this, question, blah, blah. Run this again. Add the message to the thread again, and then run the assistant together with the thread again, and then just repeat. And then once you get down here, you will see this thread growing longer and longer as you have more and more turns in the conversation. And finally, if you're just messing around and you want to clean it up, you can do a list of all of the assistants that are live in your account right now, and you just copy the assistant ID, paste it here to delete it. And what's really cool is, and probably one of the reasons why the service is down, is that you can also do all this without any code. And what's really cool about this is if you go to platform.openai.com, you go to the left menu, you'll see a new item here called Assistants. You'll see that the chatbot that we created just now is on the interface. And if you click into it, you can clone it, you can edit it, so you can change the name, and you can even change the model. So some of these things you don't even need to go into the code to adjust. And you can even upload files here. So it's really quite accessible for people who don't code. And then if you click into it, you can test it. So after you click test, you'll come onto this interface where you can actually chat with your new custom chatbot that you've created and see what the response is like. How cool is that? One of the things that I've found to be lacking is that when you give it instructions to not respond to any questions that where the knowledge is not contained within your files, it doesn't seem to stick to that instruction. Therefore, you can't really, as of today, create a chatbot that only answers questions about your knowledge base and nothing else. So it kind of doesn't quite give the level of control that maybe some corporates would like to have. But hope you found this video useful. If you need the code, come and find me on LinkedIn. I'll put my profile link below, and I'll send you a copy.